Yo, what's up everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. And on this episode we're taking a look at an on-rail shooter that is another instance where Sega and Namco collaborate for an over-the-top shooter that's got a familiar feel to 80s anime. We're checking out Vampire Knight, developed by WoW Entertainment and published by Namco in 2000 for the arcade, and getting ported to the PlayStation 2 in 2001. This, much like Ninja Assault, is another gun-con compatible game as well. Through 6 stages you'll cut through the creatures of the night while having a pretty good time in the process. So the story goes something like this. In the year 2006, as you trudge through an undisclosed French village, vampire hunters Michel and Albert continue their mission of expelling the dark forces and to eliminate Sir Vampire, the Immortal One, and his 4 lieutenants. Your goal is to make it to his castle and rescue any villagers for the evil sarcoma parasites that have taken over their home. The humans are losing hope for their survival, and the vampire hunters are their last chance for salvation. Sharpen the stakes, looks like we're going hunting. Gameplay-wise, we've got a 3D on-rail shooter similar to House of the Dead, except instead of zombies, you're up against the bloodthirsty vampire ranks led by the Immortal One. If you're familiar with that style of gameplay, this will feel very similar to the first 2 installments of House of the Dead. I'll mention up front, if you have the gun-con and a monitor that can support it, use the gun-con, as it is the optimal way to play this roughly 40-minute playthrough. Otherwise, the controller can make it happen well enough, even though some shots may be a little tricky. As you reach the opening scene in the village, you'll blast through the hordes of Vampire Legion on your journey to the castle. The first stage keeps it fairly simple and throws a few enemies at you while showing you the villagers captured to the sarcoma parasites that leech their lifeblood. Here, much like the scientists in House of the Dead, if you save them, they'll offer health and information. If you miss a sarcoma and hit the innocents, they'll transform into a vampire themselves. As you venture forward, enemies will begin to vary and you'll go through several gothic locales on your mission. Starting with only 3 hit points and 5 continues, you've got a bit of a challenge ahead. Stage 2 through 6 will have boss fights that have familiar mechanics to House of the Dead, opening with each boss's weak point, while throwing in a slight twist. A new mechanic of the interrupt meter is introduced here that will be seen in later House of the Dead games as well. What you'll want to do here is interrupt the enemy attacks to take the least damage during encounters. Each attack sequence will have their primary health bar and a smaller health bar underneath that, once emptied, will interrupt their attack patterns and allow for a damage phase. This mechanic is also seen in the later House of the Dead sequels like 3 and 4, where the interrupt meter is also in play during boss encounters. Here you'll see some very familiar attack patterns if you played through the first couple House of the Dead games, along with some unique tricks as well. The interrupt feature does add another layer of gameplay, and they're equally just as fun here. Each stage transitions with a cutscene showing how both the forces of good and evil are progressing in their ambitions, and the only narrative spoiler I'll drop here is that if you've seen the first Vampire Hunter D film, you'll recognize the trope straight away. Tearing through the rings until the last bullet hits his mark is a fun experience, and with each successful clear, including attempts, more hit points and continues will unlock, along with varying difficulties and game modes. Graphics wise, this looks similar to Sega's Naomi hardware that House of the Dead and Ninja Assault also ran on, except in this instance Vampire Knight runs on the Namco System 246 hardware. This, much like the Naomi hardware, was leased out to various developers, as well as Namco programming several of their own titles with the hardware. Soul Calibur 2, Tekken 4, Taito's Battle Gear 3, Capcom's Fighting Evolution, and Bloody Roar 3 are some of the games that utilize the System 246 board. This board utilized the Emotion Engine, a processing unit developed by Sony and Toshiba for the PlayStation 2 console, and even a few early PS3 titles. You'll notice a few different visual tricks compared to Ninja Assault, which released in the previous year, and see some visual and performance differences while both are fast-paced rail shooters. The main difference here is rescuing innocents, much like the House of the Dead games, which makes sense considering Sega AM R&D, also known as WoW Entertainment, developed the title. While Vampire Knight isn't quite as gory as House of the Dead, it's got some pretty wild imagery and scenery. Graphically, this game cooks and looks pretty solid with its polygon sprites and animations. One thing I miss from the early days of 2D gallery and rail shooters is the enemies that pop up right in front of the screen. This doesn't have much of that in this, but it does throw enemies on screen from a lot of areas, and it can get rather hectic at times. But even solo, it never really gets to the point of unmanageable, at least most times, even when using just a controller. Boss characters were all pretty fleshed out and retain that House of the Dead vibe while adding in some new visual flair with the System 246 board. The arenas and stages all have a lot of detail and a lot of destructible items, though the screen does scroll by most sections very quickly, so you gotta react fast to get those bonus items you uncover if you want to keep them. Through the game's 6 stages, you'll see some nice detailed locales like snowy forest and frozen tundra, leading into the inner corridors of the castle, leading to the chambers of the Immortal One. The day and night cycles throughout play also has some nice attention to detail, like the dawn setting into the village until the dusk of the final encounter. Along the way, the scenes look tight aside from them blazing by so quickly. For what you'll see, it all looks pretty good. Sound-wise, this also has some pretty decent sound effects, and the caliber of voice acting you'd come to expect from a shooter like this one that holds the House of the Dead vibe so close to the chest. You'll hear some tunes that have a more new school breakbeats feel to them, while also hearing more of those campy horror movie type tracks as well, all with pretty hype energy from start to finish. The voice acting also feels and sounds similar to what you would hear in the House of the Dead series, with a few twists as far as context is concerned. Instead of the banter between Agent G and Kyrian about bioweapons, you get light and dark as they converse about their ambitions of their vampiric battles over the centuries. It's a campy bit of dialogue opening up each stage and after boss encounters as a bit of a break between starting and finishing stages. The delivery won't win any awards, but it'll probably give you a chuckle as you blast everything in sight. Gunfire and Foley art all sound pretty good, and the impact of each shot has some nice weight to it. The sound engine here feels like a cross between Time Crisis and the House of the Dead series, which is a fairly solid blend of styles, never really leaning too much into either. So in that case, it strikes a pretty good balance here of variety audibly. Overall, Vampire Knight is a fun on-rail shooter that fans of the genre should probably enjoy. It's a campy and fun shooter that isn't breaking conventions, but makes for a solid way to kill an hour or two blasting the creatures of the night. For fans of Gun Con compatible games, this isn't a bad one to add to the stack either, but as far as replay value, try cranking up the difficulty if it feels too easy on normal. Though this may leave something to be desired even with its extra training and special modes, still, it's a decent shooter that if you're in the mood for something a little bit different, this might scratch that itch, at least for a little while. Vampire Knight gets a 7.5 out of 10 and comes recommended for fans of light gun games and rail shooters. It's also a relatively cheap title to pick up with the complete base version going for around $30 and about $80 for the big box gun bundle, which is a nice piece, granted you don't have a GunCon 1 or 2 already. Of the light gun games for the PS2, this, much like Ninja Assault, are a couple of interesting games that, while having a similar skeleton to past titles, goes off and does their own thing, which is a nice change of pace even with their recycled tropes. If you see a cabinet of this at your local arcade or out on your travels, give it a quick spin. It's a good bit of fun with a decent challenge. And I thank you again if you made it this far in the video. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you use it as a resource. Check back often, we'll have more reviews and commentaries coming up in the near future. And until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.